Welcome back to another episode of That's Business. Today's guest, Nick Welham, is an experienced executive with a talent for uncovering the impact of culture, process, and technology on customer experience to drive organizational strategy and maximize profitability. Experiences include CXO leadership, business ownership, and consultative advising on operational excellence, FP&A, and technology strategy for $20 million to $1 billion national and international organizations in healthcare, wellness, life science, and legal. Nick drove a turnaround for a 35-location medical organization, architected and led a digital transformation from paper for a multi-state organization, and has M&A experience. Nick, thank you so much for finally being on the podcast. I said I'd bully you because we've been talking about this, for 2 years now? About?
Maybe 2 years. I mean, you're bullying me about good stuff, right? So you got me posting on social media. That's a good thing. So yeah, great to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm extremely excited to talk with Nick because we've actually been working together on some things for the Resume Rescue, and he's just been so transformational in helping us out. So before we dive into all of that, we're going to throw it back to childhood. What did you want to be when you grew up, and what was your childhood like, if you feel comfortable telling us?
Sure. So as you can probably guess from the accent, I'm not from around here being Michigan. I was born in London. I grew up in a series of small villages around an old British town called Colchester. It's now a city. It was the original Roman capital of England. There was a Roman temple there that the natives burnt down, and there's a whole story around that. And then it also had a Norman keep there. So it's surrounded by history. But I grew up in a village that had more sheep and pigs than humans.
Wow.
I know that's my claim to fame. But anyway, so what do they want to be? So it's frightening now because I grew up in the 80s, right? And that was 40 years ago. But when I was a kid, I used to read comics, and I always wanted to be a Spitfire pilot, because that was only 40 years before that.
Mm-hmm.
And that seemed, World War II seems a long time ago, or a train driver, but a steam train driver. So neither of those panned out for me, but that's what I wanted to do.
That's so interesting. Now, did you have a big personality difference? Because a lot of guests I've had on this podcast talk about they were very different as kids or kind of growing up, but what was the environment you grew up in, especially in a town that had more animals than people?
It was not a town. It's flattering. I grew up in a little village outside the real town. So we had a bus every hour to the town.
Oh.
Yeah, it's sophisticated. Anyway, so yeah, probably similar, a bit geeky. I did pretty well at school until I got a little freedom. Used to love riding motorbikes and still do. Got a definite appreciation. I've fallen off many times. So some of the things that I did then, I still love doing. I was interested in computers as a kid, and then became a software engineer. Still love riding motorbikes, started practicing martial arts. It's been a theme through my life. Similar, I guess, probably more outgoing now. You know, when you start being around other humans, you have to be.
And I love that you just dropped martial arts and all these other cool things you've done for a lot of your life. And I don't remember the timeline. I know you've told me, but you went to college, and then at what point in that transitional period when you moved to the United States, and what was that? I don't want to jump ahead in the story, but went to college, software engineering, got into technical field. Talk us through that stage of your life, maybe in your late teens, early 20s.
Okay, so I went to Bournemouth University on the south coast of England, and I went to study psychology, communication, and computing, because I actually had a little bit of a kind of pushback. Didn't love doing computer stuff, and I got really interested in psychology, specifically body language. And I know we're supposed to show our hands to show honesty, right? So I get the camera's too low. But it just fascinated me. And so I studied essentially psychology, but we looked at things like, how do computers mediate communication? So we're not in the same place. You can't see, my whole body. You can't see my body language. It has an effect, right? You talk on the phone. We text each other. Miscommunication? Yes. I mean, that's why we have emojis and emoticons, right? Because we want to try and inject something in there. Oh, I'm joking. This is my sarcasm, that kind of stuff. But we were talking about that kind of thing and what effect it had on the communication back in the day, but had no idea that all this stuff would happen. We got to email each other and do pretty cool stuff. So, yeah, I left there and thought about going into the Army as in the Royal Engineers. Unfortunately, I messed up my knee. I'd had a bad knee, and it just didn't work out well on the assault course. But that was very interesting. Then found a job working for digital equipment. And I did a sales job. So I did cold calling. And I'd done a few jobs like that before. Do not love it. So hats off to anybody who is a real hunter in the sales terms. We all got made redundant after 3 weeks. And I was really fortunate because I landed then, that was actually in Colchester, I landed a job in London working in a book publisher's, had a lot of fun, had a highly inappropriate interview that would make people cringe these days.
Wait, I have to ask. I'm going to. What did they ask you? If you feel comfortable, but I got to know.
I don't mind. So I sat down with the, I think she was called the personnel director was her title. So you can see that, we're going back a bit. And Dot was her name. And she said to me, so tell me about your situation. I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, are you married? Do you have a girlfriend? I'm like, oh, well, I just split up with my girlfriend. She goes, we're 80% female here. I'm sure you'll find somebody. So
it's funny, but not funny. There's other companies like I know Quicken Loans or Rocket and some of those, like they encourage you to date internally. So if you work late hours, because why people leave jobs is usually for the family or some of these like hunter sales jobs.
Yep.
So I had a friend work there and they're like, oh no, they encourage like to get your spouse involved, work for the company or find someone there. So you were together and didn't care about the late hours. Okay, so the interview happens. We get this job. We liked it.
Decided with two friends we were going to go on a European tour on our motorcycles. So the planning was really detailed. We went to the pub, I think, 3 times. One of my friends, John, he was really into map reading. So we plotted out we were going to go to breakfast in Brussels. Then we were going to go over to Prague, Vienna, and Venice in 2 weeks.
Wow.
We scaled it down a little bit, but at the end of the day, we did do breakfast in Brussels. We ended up in Prague, and I ran into a young lady from around here, West Bloomfield, and we met up again the next night. And we kept in contact, and eventually one of us had to move. So I was in computers. We speak roughly the same language. And so I thought, well, I'll come over. It'll be easy, right? Apart from that immigration thing. But I did get a job in Chicago working for a trade show company doing their IT. Stayed there for about 6 months. Unfortunately, that didn't pan out. The guy who owned the company had grown up in Germany in early 40s and held some strong views that I found rather uncomfortable. So I looked around for another position and interviewed with 2 places. And one of them was Winston & Strawn, a big law firm. So stayed in Chicago and we lived there in total for about 6 or 7 years. So I did a bunch of software development for those guys. So I'd moved over from help desk to kind of general support, Lotus Notes admin, and then was in software development for Lotus Notes. So yeah, that's how I came to the States the first time.
I don't think I realized you and Lainey met on your trip with your boys. I don't think I realized that.
Yeah.
Of course, you have one of those great stories, like the one in a million. What was this trip like for you and how old were you doing this? I mean, I feel like this is something a lot of people dream about, take a trip with the buddies and go on it, but you actually did it, which is awesome.
Well, we had some good near-death experiences. That everybody emerged unscathed, thankfully.
That's good.
One of the things that really stood out to me at the time was 96. So we crossed over from what was East Germany into Czech Republic, and we did not take the highway to Prague. We went through the back roads, and it was incredibly rural. I mean, it was like going back 40, 60, 80 years. Like there was no modern stuff there, and kids would run past and point at us and like run along and try and keep up. It was like, wow, it's like almost aliens coming in for them. It's just amazing. And then we rode into Prague and we're like, well, why are we here? Because it's full of like, concrete tower blocks from the communist era because it's been rebuilt. And we're like, ooh, right, this is a tourist destination until we got to the middle, the center, and it's beautiful. But it's just interesting. And then when we got to the hotel, the concierge said, oh, well, do your bikes leak oil? And we're like, no. There's, you can park them inside in the lobby.
Okay.
And we're like, great, we'll get stolen. Thank you very much.
Right. Fast forward, you're in Chicago. So we transitioned different career paths within IT, technical services and all. At what point were you thinking this is the route you wanted to go? Because I always laugh at what people's job titles are now. I mean, I didn't know as a kid like what a freaking resume writer was or what a podcasting wasn't even a thing. it's so interesting of how these different stories and situations and, hey, moving halfway across the world kind of change you there. So from Chicago, when did we end up in Michigan?
I started doing the software development, had a consultant there, was really helpful, awesome guy, and he taught me a lot. And then I started helping out other people who were doing similar to things that I was doing on the admin side, and similarly getting frustrated that you have to do the same thing 52 times. It's like, there's got to be an easier way. And I was like, well, how about this? How about that? And so I started building up a team around me. We helped out the firm's largest client, and I got enough brownie points after I got homesick to say, you know what, I did a little research first. But basically, I showed my boss, I invited him out for a beer that he eventually ended up paying for anyway, and more. I said, you're basically underserving the European community because we had offices in London, Paris, Geneva, and Moscow. And you've no support out, no true IT people. So what you need is a European IT manager. They're going to be based in London, and you're looking at him. And credit to Chip, awesome guy. He went, okay, and he made it happen. However, the day I accepted and we negotiated, and they gave me basically what I wanted. What more can I ask? Come back, and this is my story, and so I'm putting it on record, is that I accepted this, and then I went home and found out that my wife was pregnant.
Surprise!
Yeah. So really scary time for Lainey, and big turmoil, and adapting to a new country, and we moved over, and I was very fortunate that old friend of mine, I flew over to look for houses, and he took me around, and I thought I knew where I wanted to live, but he actually pointed me back in an area called Greenwich in London, and a great place to be. And somehow I think we ended up in the only kind of tower flat, apartment building that had a doorman. And so when my in-laws came over, they were like, "Oh, you have a doorman, it's good, they're going to look after my daughter." And so it was okay.
It was acceptable.
Yes. So I spent 2 years traveling around Europe, and that was kind of part of the problem. Is I should have thought this one through, that if you're going to be a European IT manager, you
gotta travel. Yes.
Go to work and come back home. So I spent a lot of time on the Eurostar, got to go on the TGV, which is kind of a cool experience, 180 miles an hour on the train. It's totally different from flying. And I spent time in Geneva and Paris, and almost got to go to Moscow, but didn't.
Favorite place you've traveled to?
I used to love going to Greece when I was a kid. Loved it. So I know this sounds really exotic because we're based here, but it's almost like going to Florida for people in Michigan, because you have more holiday, more vacation time in Europe. So we would go to Greece in the spring, and I always used to get horrifically burnt. But when that didn't happen, beautiful. It's like 80 degrees and sunny and beautiful beaches. And my dad used to be a classics teacher, so he thought, I'll learn modern Greek. It's going to be very similar to ancient Greek, and it's really not. More power to him. He's done it. But we used to go in the middle of nowhere, and we would get these old women coming out, like give us a little rub on the head and giving us some orange. And we had a guy, we were driving around, and my dad asked for directions, and he basically opened up his tavernes restaurant for us and served us lunch.
Out of a movie, like any movie in Greece, I swear. That's awesome. And something I learned, because I think I shared this with you, I have family in Italy, and my cousin actually lived here. I'm actually sitting at his desk when he lived with me. I didn't realize how cheap it is to travel country to country in Europe. Or he's like, "Oh, Angela, it's so cheap. It's so cheap." And he was one that's full of crap, but I love him to death, one of those. But I'm like, I can't believe How reasonable it is to travel country to country.
Yep. I mean, it depends how you fly, right? I mean, there's a range of options, but if you go somewhere like Ryanair, and you'll pay for breathing the air on the plane.
Right.
But you can fly for 50 quid, $75, $80, dirt cheap. Now, put your luggage on. I mean, everybody's charging us for that these days, but it's still relatively inexpensive. And like I said, I mean, the perception is it's almost like flying to Florida.
Right. So, lived in England. We're back there. Did we have daughter yet or not yet? Or how long were you over there?
So we lived there for 2 years. Charlie was born after a couple of months. Awesome little dude. So proud of him now. He's applying to all kinds of places. I'm in awe. Anyway, I also remember this little crazy guy used to crawl around and chase pigeons. So Charlie was born there, and then we had an offer we couldn't refuse from my father-in-law. Basically, he and his friend had founded medical weight loss clinic here in Michigan. My brother-in-law had joined the company, and he was pushing for them to computerize. So in 2007, they had no computers outside main office, and it ran well, and they were a successful business. Now, it seems really surprising, but empires have been run on lefts, right? And how calculators, they had fax machines. And I'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute. It was an interesting transition. Anyway, so they were interested in what I could do. They tried to computerize before, but had failed. And they said, come and join the business. And, if you want to be a part of a law firm business, you really need to be a lawyer. They have a different model now in the UK. But so I was like, great, let's talk, what can happen here. I handed in my notice. We packed up, found out that my wife was pregnant, and we flew back to the US and landed in Michigan. And it was kind of strange being back. So kind of bouncing, flipping, you kind of get culturally confused about everything and how you do things. And so I remember one of my first experiences was I got a laptop order, sat down and I asked the office manager, I said, where's the network jack? And she said, I don't know, you're the IT guy, you tell me. And I'd come from an IT department, that's worldwide, 24/7, 130 people. I'm like,
wow.
Okay, I've taken a big bite here. Better chew on, swallow, and push through this. So we looked around. We basically tried to find an EMR that would be accessible to people who, some of them had literally never used computers.
And this is 2007 you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's not that long ago.
Yeah, no, I mean, they'd never used them at work because we didn't have them.
Right.
We had a fantastically loyal workforce. Some of them been working there for 20 years. So it's not like they used them before or not. And so we had to find something that was accessible. We had to find something that was very focused just on the weight loss bariatric industry. We couldn't find it. So it's like, okay, well, you're a software engineer, build. So we did. And so tried to figure out what we had to do. So it was an interesting experience in terms of balancing people's expectations. So one partner was like, get it done, you're wasting money. I had another partner who was, in fact, he said, well, why can't you go to Best Buy and just put them on the desk? I'm like, yes, but then what? That doesn't help.
Not just the solution, right?
Right, yeah. That's the simpler part. One partner who was like, would be excited if they could see the money ticking up during the day, which I totally get.
Right.
It's a great, wonderful situation if you can be there. And one partner really understood, what was going on. So it's a question of balancing expectations. And I didn't want to just put the computer on the desk because it also then interrupts everybody's workflow. So you've got people who, have never used computers. We have to train them how to use mice. And interesting questions, which is like, I've got to the edge of the mouse pad. What do I do? And it's intuitive to us. And, it's funny. I watched my daughter when she was about 3 or 4, when she was poking at an old smartphone. And she said, it's not working. I'm like, it's not a touchscreen. And she kind of looked.
What?
Yeah. So, it's fascinating. We ended up building an enterprise resource planning system, essentially, rather than just a medical record system. And built a team around me, had some really talented network engineers and software developers, and we pushed through and we basically were able to migrate people who had legitimate concerns about how do I do this? I'm not sure I can do this. What impact will it have? There's certain concerns about, you're going to be monitoring me now. Well, yes, but no. There was interesting business results that I alluded to earlier. The old system was you wrote down all your numbers, you faxed them midday, end of day, and you had that sense of accountability. And so you had to fax your stuff off to your supervisor. The supervisor would have to go through the numbers and then fax them back. If there was any kind of issue there, then it reversed the chain, right? And then it bounced back up with hopefully the right answer. But it was interesting to see that the change when you went to computerized and initially you had to push a button and then you didn't have to push a button. And the level of accountability changed because it was removed. It's almost like signing for something. You were signing for your day's work when you wrote it down and faxed it off. And we had to really push, and figure out what we were going to do to build that accountability back in.
This sounds like a lot to take on. Of course, building this from nothing and just to computerize and automate a whole business. How long did this transformation take? And how did you manage to keep your patience? I know you are a lot more patient than I am, but even just simple questions when, my grandmother calls me or my mother calls me and they're like, how do I do this? I'm like, just do it this way. So for you to do that for a whole organization, for so many employees and going from literally nothing to a brand new system and things you don't think about. I mean, how to use a mouse, it's crazy. So how long did that take?
a long time. And we started in 2007.
Okay.
We probably had most of the clinics done by 2012, 13, somewhere around that time, actually rolled out. And then we started looking at voice over IP and what we could do with that and integrating it so that when patients called, their record would pop up, or when we advertised that we knew that you saw the advert in this month's edition of like Save On or Red Plum. And so we could source advertising. So it never really stopped. There was more stuff to do. Patients-wise, I don't know. I worked in the help desk for a long time, right? And I've done tech support for my mum and my mother-in-law. So here's the key for that one. Train up your kids. You need to, go and adopt a kid to take the course. I actually took my son out, and my mother-in-law has 2 laptops, and they were identical. And we went through and we set up, which I think was a great experience for him. And now he does some of the tech support, which is great.
Oh, so smart. Yes.
I had a great team around me. I had a wonderful trainer. She's very, very patient. Everybody was very set on the purpose of like, okay, well, look, I know you're scared, but this can actually be better for you, and this is why. And so we really tried to figure out, what's in it for you? Why would I want to do this? Because with any change management, humans are like water, right? We flow in the easiest direction. It's just the way we are. Now, if you're going to say to me, Nick, you can do your job and get paid the same and put in the same amount of effort, or you can do this job differently, get paid the same and put in, 20% more effort, which one will you choose? So you have to figure out what's in it for you. And people will put in more effort. I think almost everybody comes to work wanting to help other people to do better, to contribute, to be heard. So if you can figure out how to connect the strategic goal back down to, at the micro level of, if I do make this change, what will the impact be? Yes, maybe I'll have to do more work, but actually if I can help out somebody else, well, we can make a better impact, then I will do it. Great. Just need to keep reinforcing it's a good thing. In fact,
yes,
it's change management in essence, and it's real cool.
Well, and just the small things. I honestly didn't appreciate it until owning this business. And it's like, oh, you don't have an IT team anymore to help out. Just the automations or like the voice over internet phone or VoIP as we talk about. But when we implemented that, I'm like, this is crazy. I can't believe we have this. I have a whole different line that it goes to my cell phone and goes in my CRM, and this is cool. So I have so much respect for anyone that does these change management activities and really transforms organizations to make it so easy. So if you're listening to this and you work for a large corporation that's pretty tech savvy, appreciate it because it's a lot. So we're in 2012, we do this transformation. In that time period, when did you have the idea to start your own business or do C-Link Consulting?
So we had a generation transition, unfortunately. My father-in-law and his best friend passed away around that time. Oh. My brother-in-law and I started a energy company. It was like pop rocks with energy. So it was called InstaBoost. And it was really interesting. He had a great idea. We saw a company came in. We get all kinds of people coming to us saying, hey, try this protein bar, try this shake, try this, that, and the other. Some of it honestly tasted like cardboard. Some of it was great. So we had a company come in and they had 2 separate products. And one of them was an energy powder that you put in and you stirred up and you drank. And, it gets into conversations about like who's lugging around water bottles, how do you pour it in, how is it shaped, And the other was a Pop Rocks vitamin. He said, well, can you combine those? And they were like, I don't know. And so we worked with them for a while. There was a few issues, learned a lot about kind of whole new range of things. So first of all, the Pop Rocks thing, that apparently they compress it in carbon dioxide. And so it's compressed. So it's very hard to, we looked into who can do this. And so we used to buy it from Canada. It was a new formulation. So we were like, well, okay, where do we want to do it? Well, where are people taking energy drinks from? Gas stations, supermarkets, grocery stores. And so we eventually formed a partnership with Maya, and they had us in 60 stores. We were in some gas stations. Learned a lot about shelf life, about things like, well, what happens if somebody steals your product?
Valid.
Who pays for that? Actually, you basically can take on almost an insurance policy with the grocery store to cover loss and damage. And then you start thinking about package design. Okay, well, if I put my stuff on your shelf, how does it look? How easy is it for the shelf stacker to open up? And as a former shelf stacker, I can tell you, you want minimal hassle. So, yeah, really interesting experience. Well, at the end of the day, what I learned was that while we've been selling this and the clinics have been doing well, the difference was education. There's no way a gas station attendant is going to say, well, tell me more about when you have a slump or,
Right.
what are your goals here? It's like, you want it? Great. You don't? Okay, no problem. So I learned more about entrepreneurship when I did my executive MBA, but one of the things was market research and customer discovery. We didn't do it. So I think we came out, perhaps not, but it was a very interesting learning experience, if not an expensive one. So
I'm learning so much about you, and I talk to you, I feel, every week, but I'm just learning more and more about you as this podcast goes on. It's interesting too, as you're talking through this, I just feel like you're like, yeah, I just took on this new adventure. Yeah, I just moved. Yeah, I just did this. No problem. I like the cool, calm, collected I feel that you are.
Can't cry over spoiled milk. So
right, you can't.
I led to turn around at medical weight loss and then sold out my interest at the end of 17, started sealing. And I was in the middle of doing my executive MBA. And I think everybody at work kind of breathed a sigh of relief because I'd come back on a Monday, just like a Friday night, Saturday, every second weekend over at Michigan State. And you absorb all the stuff. And I would be like, oh my goodness, this is awesome. And I think everybody else was. But I was in the dangerous position of being the CEO. And so when I would come back and, oh my goodness, what's he going to talk about today? We should do this. Oh, that's great, Nick, But they were very tolerant and kind. So it was very interesting to actually put theory into practice. But I sold out my interest, and then I started my now company, Sealink Consulting then. And initially it was around cultural change and got a great appreciation for cultural financial modeling. I started learning more about some of the things I'd put into place in terms of meetings and decision-making and how you do change management that I kind of latched onto and learned, but never really understood how it hung together. So I was lucky in terms of I managed to do it right, but I was lucky, not planned, if you put it in exactly the same right way. So started looking around, still do work occasionally with companies around cultural change, around purpose and values and behaviors. I think that in some degree, the whole kind of culture thing has died down a little or become more mainstream. It's certainly less of a, hype. Think about the Gartner hype cycle where everything's like, oh my goodness, everybody's got to do it. And so people start paying lip service to it at least. And the best companies actually figured out that purpose was about how does your organization help other people and change their lives? What are the values that your team needs to uphold to do a good job? And what are the behaviors that you see in the organization that link to those values? And if you do all that stuff, you can have a highly motivated and excited workforce who are going to be able to make decisions. And so linking it back to decision making, and I always use this analogy, I'm a bad bowler. Purpose is your pins, your values are your bumpers. And at the end of the day, if you can say to your team, go bowl, keep it in your lane, hit the pins. I don't care how you bowl. You can throw it between your legs. You can throw it overhead. As long as it stays in the lane and you get that objective, then we're all good, right? And so then you give your team a lot more autonomy to do what they need to do because they're upholding your values and getting the job done in the right way.
And where do you think the organizations that feel, oh, we've always done it this way, or it's worked for us, we've been in business 50 years, and why do we need to change, and whatever, so everyone's replaceable, and kind of that old school mentality, how do you get through, let's say you have a potential client that's interested, getting some backlash from stakeholders, whatever that may be, but how have you gotten through, or maybe you have an example of a tougher client that you were able to make this huge transformation with, culture change?
Well, I love that. So if you're like that and you want to challenge me, give me a call. If you're like that and you want to change, then give me a call anyway. But this is when I go, ding, yes. I'll give you an example back at medical weight loss. We used to give everybody a lab. And so we spent a lot of money on that. And when I looked at the financial side and looked at our cash flow, the question is, should we be doing this? And so there was a concern within the leadership team that we wouldn't be seen as medical without it. Fair enough. I get that. I said, okay, go think about it. How long do you need? And this, well, give us 3 weeks. We'll come back. We talked it through. And I talked about the dynamics, and we talked about the fact is we had some people who were following a diet, and there were some people who had some real, valid medical concerns. Well, they have a lab. If you had one kidney, maybe you had HIV or maybe you had cancer, then yes, a lab. You've got to have a lab. If you're doing a certain specific diet that put more pressure on your kidneys, do a lab. But for most people, they were healthy people who had a few pounds to lose or quite a lot of weight, but still essentially healthy people. So they came back and they said, yeah, that's okay. We're behind that, but go talk with the medical director, see what he says. Okay, no problem. So I went up and spoke to our medical director. And in the end, he said, well, yeah, I never wanted to do this. It's a liability.
Oh.
Because if you have information, and this is kind of right back to, about somebody's health and you don't take action on it, you're essentially being liable. And so we had to make sure that every single lab was correctly read. The more you read, I mean, essentially, there's always some level of error. No process is perfect, but there's always some level of error. So being able to focus on the people who really needed this. And then we'd always had trouble recruiting medical staff, so NPs, PAs, RNs, and so on, and MAs. That was really a problem. So we needed less medical staff. The real trick was making sure that the people who were left felt that they were valued and had an important role to play, which they did. But we saved a lot of money. We'd probably say $200,000 that way.
Wow. Something that's saying that change, I mean, that does make a huge difference. Jeez.
Well, and the other side of it is, think about it as a potential patient.
Right.
You know, you come along, think about the customer experience. If I was going on a diet, and you can debate whether I should or not, but so what am I going to worry about? I'm going to worry about being hungry. So what's the first thing I'm going to experience? I'm going to be told, hey, Nick, starve yourself, and then we're going to poke you with a needle.
That doesn't sound fun. Right.
Right. But, I mean, that's what it is. But there's all kinds of stuff. I mean, I see this actually a lot in medical settings. So if you go for your annual physical, think about this one. You go along, and I assume that most doctors do it this way. But you go, you have your physical, and then they send you off to get your blood drawn. Okay, well, hold on. Shouldn't we be discussing the results of my blood draw and my annual physical?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just thinking about things in a different way. When people say, this is the way we've always done it, tell me more about that. Do you actually know why you do it that way? And often they don't. And they just go, oh, that's the way we've always done it. Great. Why? Okay, let's get to we don't know. Well, how else could we do it? Uh-huh. Oh, you do know why. Great. Tell me more about that. Okay, that maybe that's reasonable and valid. Is it still valid? Because what was decided 50 years ago in your example, probably the dynamics have changed in some shape or form. So, yeah, these are wonderful opportunities. I mean, like if you go through and think about the way you've always done things in your business, I listened to a podcast and they said, what you should do is if you take your task list and you get through it and you look every quarter and you say, I didn't do this, should it still be on your task list? There's a very good reason not to, because every time you look at that task list, you've got to reevaluate that thing. And especially if you hadn't done it in like 2 or 3 quarters, get rid of it. It's clearly not important. If you feel bad about throwing out the thing just in case, archive it, but get it off the list, because every time you review that list, you're using mental energy to look at every single item and think about it.
There's so many technology tools you can use now, and you could do sprint boards, and you could do whatever Kanban style of, hey, this is priority, this is later. And I'm lucky that Nick, that you also know, he helped us with that. And now working with you has been even incredible. And that's what I really want to dive into. But there's so many things. And I think as business owners, or if you're a part of a large entity, you know what you know and you don't know what you don't know. And just hiring someone like you, I mean, this tiniest little changes compound to make such a big impact at the end of the year. Where do you want to be this time next year? So I think it's really interesting. And I think for what we're doing, financial modeling, it's a vulnerable process. I mean, I kept saying, don't judge me, don't judge me, don't judge me. And you have been just so instrumental to help. And I will say I'm pretty good at culture, so I don't need you for that. But
Yep.
The other pieces and what I want to dive into next is what other services do you offer, or what are some of your other key accomplishments you've achieved thus far?
Sure. Well, it's been a real pleasure working with you and your team. So you got the culture right, and I'll plug you. If you haven't met Angela or worked with her, you should.
Thanks.
No, my pleasure. So I'm a fractional COO, CEO. So I've done some interim roles, but on a day-to-day basis, I do a lot of work around, as you said, financial modeling, financial health checks. You know, do you have KPIs around your business? Do you know how to positively impact? Does your team know that they have agency around what changes they can make to their practices that will improve the business? Do you know which customers are your best customers and why? Do you know what the impact is of getting rid of the customers who always complain and never have anything and always ask for a bit more and don't want to pay their bills? I do a lot of work around workflow. So what's happening? What's the process? Why are we doing this kind of stuff? Going back to that's the way we've always done it. Really? Why? I help out in strategic planning. So this is a really fun project. Okay, so where are you now? And where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years? Okay, great. So if I'm working with the owner or the CEO, what's your vision? Great. What does that look like for your employees? Why are they going to get excited about being here? What's in it to drive them and help you drive this business forward? What about your customers? I mean, we all want to double sales, but the truth is, if it was that easy, if we could all sprinkle the magic pixie dust on there, well, then we'd be sprinkling, right?
Yes, we would.
So why does it look different for your customers in 10 years? So then we figure out what are the problem domains that we need to overcome to get you there. And sometimes there's a degree of overlap. And then we start really digging down into those problem domains. And we use a technique, it's called kinetic. And we look at how they spiral out in terms of constructors and constraints. So what are the constraints that are holding you back? And what are the constructors of those constraints? What makes them happen that's getting in your way? We start attacking those. And we start attacking those in the order that we plot out on a time energy graph. And I think it's incredibly important to know where you want to go, how you're going to get there, what do you have to do, engaging the team on that. But then also when you plot out the time energy, what is traditionally called low-hanging fruit, so it's on the bottom left of your diagram, they call it high velocity. There's also another key area on the top right, high time, high effort, and it's called counterfactual. Ain't going to happen. So I worked in a startup that was trying to petition the CMS for a rules change, which would take 2 to 3 years, and they had 8 months of funding.
Oh, no. That's not going to work.
Well, I mean, in the end, stuff worked out for them. I don't think that changed. But the thing is, where's your time and effort best spent, right? Because it's all a limited supply. So how do you move things forward? Whether it's nudging them, and then how do you nudge them? I mean, there are things out there that you can do business-wise that change, but you really need to then think about, is it a micro nudge where you just do something, right? Just a little something, and it can have a cascading impact. Or is it what I'd call a micro negotiation? So thinking about who are the players in this, right? Who are the supporting cast? Who's the supporter? Who are the saboteurs? What are their predispositions? What's in it for them, right? And what are the changes? How do we get them to do that using conation? So thinking about how do you get positive intent? And there's 7 types. So how do we really essentially set it up for success? That leads me into something else I do, which is RevOps. So looking at, okay, so you're advertising and marketing, fantastic. How do you measure that? What are the steps? Do you actually have KPIs? Does your marketing company tell you what's going on? How do you see that coming down? You've all seen the Google AdWords, the Sankey diagrams where it kind of narrows off and branches out. How do you get to goal? And when you plot it that way, how does it look? And then how much is it costing you? When you look at your advertising budget, and I've spent a lot of money on awareness, right? A lot of money. What did it get me? And how do you make sure that that branch basically stays ideally consistent, but that's not realistic. But how do you make it bigger at the end of the tunnel? And what does it cost you to basically sit down with a customer and go, these are my products and services versus what you're actually selling? So interesting stuff. But then in each stage, what's the customer process? So you've got things like research, like I think I'm in the market for this. I'm going to go out and look, how do you satisfy the customer need then? What about the next step, which may be booking something or putting something in your cart? What do I need to know? You need to boil the frog effectively to answer the customer's questions so they don't leap out, right? You can't expect somebody to go, I'm amazing, and you go to my website and you buy everything.
The dream.
Once again, it's our pixie dust.
Right. Where's that pixie dust? We need to find it, right?
Oh, I'm still looking. I'll let you know.
I just don't know where to start with how to explain what you do for the financial modeling RevOps that we're working on together. But from my point of view, Nick and I were actually just getting coffee. We were in a networking group together, wanted to meet more, learn each other's business. And I was like, oh, wait, I don't do anything that you are talking about. And I need someone like you. And I didn't know where to start because financials are a very scary, vulnerable thing. Yeah. But the beautiful thing that Nick created, I just am forever amazed at the work, the magic, the pixie dust you do in Excel. But looking at everything from how long does it take you to send out a proposal? How long does it take for you to follow up? I mean, things I know I wasn't thinking about, and I know a lot of my entrepreneur friends aren't thinking about. I mean, yes, the old adage of time is money and opportunity costs and basic economics, but what does that actually mean for your business? So I want you to walk through the process, and you are more than welcome to use me as an example. You have free reign to do that, but how you work with companies, because everyone needs you, and this especially for RevOps. So how did you do this, and what's the process of how you work with clients?
Sure. So as you may have got from my background, I love a good problem, right? I love solving things. So this is fun to me, and it's kind of geeky fun. I mentioned it's still a geeky right? So basically, we're looking at a set time period. And you're right. I mean, financials are scary, right? Nobody wants to look at their financial situation and make tough choices. I mean, that's why we employ people to do it, financial advisors. The question is, what are you going to get? And I'll get to that. What period do you want to analyze? Are we looking at like the last 3 months? Are we comparing this year and last year? And it really depends on the state of your business. So if you have a business like yours, Angela, it's growing significantly, it becomes, much less valid to compare years because you've grown significantly, which is fantastic. But if you have a fairly stable business, then we're talking a year-to-year kind of thing. And what we're doing is really, part of it is financial education. So, I didn't really know this stuff before I did my MBA, despite running a business. And I also didn't appreciate certain things like cash flow. Where is your money tied up? We all have accounts where, there's payables in there, or we're figuring out the electricity bill is due, whether it's personal or business, I need to put some money somewhere, whether it's mentally allocating the funds in your current account or you have a specific payables account. You're doing this stuff, and there's money tied up in your business. There's also money that you owe that you haven't paid. And so, you need to know what the cash conversion cycle is and how you reduce that. And that's a combination of your AR, accounts receivable, your accounts payable, and your work in progress. But we're really trying to understand what's happening to your business financially. What's the delta between then and now? What's the direction? And breaking it down. So what does it mean when we're talking, COGS or expenses, and what is profit? I've sat there and I've looked at P&Ls and gone, oh, great, the revenue's up. And a lot of people judge their business by revenue. You and I have had a conversation about that. And my response to you is, it doesn't matter what your revenue is, it matters what the profit is, right?
Right.
I would much rather have a $1 million business that's making a healthy profit than a $100 million business that's losing money. Now, I'm sure there's potential there, but
right.
So the question is, where's your cash going and how much money is tied up in the business? So, correct me if I'm wrong, we walked through this. We talked about, where the money is. We then talked about, how can you make changes? So I call it pulling the 7 levers. One of the changes we made was to the accounts receivable. I think we reduced that by over 80%. So we've reduced the cash conversion cycle. Ideally, for a business, you want to be in a negative cash conversion cycle, which means that you get your money before you have to pay your bills, which is all good until you stop producing.
Right.
But what you don't want to be is in a situation where there is a massive receivable cycle, because in general, further out receivables go, less likely people are to pay them. You've also paid your people, and you're basically paying interest on that money. Whether it's money that you can't use to reinvest in the business and drive it forward, whether it's money you borrow from the bank at, let's just say 10, 14, whatever percentage it is these days, it's not cheap. So if you can reduce that, you can either then take that money and reinvest it in the business to drive growth or realize some profit.
And it's just small changes in the AR piece of it. We met in person, myself and my 2 employees, and you challenged us to say, okay, how do we solve this? Or the A, B, and C customer piece that we still use to this day. And it's just such a small change, but I mean, our AR has stayed so low because of it. And it's been a lot less stressful rather than oh, shoot, payroll's coming out, or this is happening because we have the money up front now. And, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, well, that sounds so silly, Angela, why wouldn't you just catch that? But you need an outside perspective. And at least I know I do this because I'm in it all day, every day. I mean, it's my freaking life, inside of work, outside of work, every facet. But doing what you do and the fact that you love to problem solve, because this stuff stresses me the heck out. So thankful for you. And you being realistic and challenging us, because one of our goals for this year is we'd like to double our revenue from what we did last year. And the projections you did of, okay, well, how are we going to get there based on your service offerings, based on what you're going to do? I'm like, I don't know how to crunch these numbers. I don't know where to start. And you coming up with okay, you honestly could, and this is how you do it. And this has been huge and something we're still working on, but I feel so, I'm sleeping better at night. My anxiety's down from this, but it's something I feel a lot of, especially small business owners, stress about, and just hire you. You are well worth the money. Like, for sure. I will say it till I'm blue in the face. Sorry to go on the tangent, but we're in 2024. What exciting things are you looking forward to or that you can share with us for your business?
Well, I'm working with great companies.
Thank you.
I have an exciting, can't say partnership because that has legal connotations, but relationship with Sandler Training. Love those guys. With a bunch of existing clients. And then I've also been doing some work in the environmental space. So fascinating company based in Chicago called Microcycle. And they use the mycelium. It's the root network of mushrooms. And if you guys go, I know what mycelium is. I just thought they came in a punnet in the supermarket, right?
Yeah, that's how they're
That's the fruit. But it's the root network that comes out first. And the fruit comes when the root network thinks it's running out of resources. And that's a stress sign. And then it's, anyway. So they are using the mycelium to break down gypsum board, the drywall. And they can break down rubber tires and plastics and all kinds of stuff into raw materials. So it's been a fascinating and wonderful learning experience. Also talking with a more local company and working with them fast, and they have a fantastic water filtration system. And it can extract 90% of the water for things like caustic paint baths, oil wellheads. And the water comes out actually better usually than the utility water. So they're part of the circular economy. And so fascinating stuff like recycling and reuse. I mean, the ultimate goal is, and certainly Fast is starting to realize this with auto manufacturers, that you can literally take away your wastewater as long as it's consistent, consistent nastiness. So it can be hot, it can have a very wide pH range. But if it's consistent, they can extract the bad stuff and feed back the good water into your supply. So they can reduce, they're essentially water as a service. They can reduce the water load by 90%. Can have a significant impact in companies that don't have sewage or can't put the waste down there, so you can pack the waste. And also for companies that can't open because water's scarce. So we've been having some very initial conversations with companies in Mexico where they can't open because there's not enough water. But if you only use 10% of the water, now we're talking a different story.
So fascinating. Wow. You just really are all over with the types of businesses you work with. And I think that's the best possible thing. As we wrap this up, what advice do you have for listeners?
Oh, gosh. So we talked about this briefly, so I could talk for hours about decision making. So have a plan. Make some kind of plan, set a goal, tangible goal. We've all heard of SMART goals. Do something around that. Where do you want to be? And then backtrack it. In terms of listeners who are running businesses and running meetings, I'm going to say, think about how you're running meetings. There's lots of great ways to run meetings. There's also lots of bad ways. But the question is, when you sit around the room and you look at all the people there and the talent they have and they all want to contribute, how are you bringing that out? And how much is it costing you for you to run the meeting and you to make all the decisions? Because you're wasting their talent and they're not going to stick around either. So really think about drawing out opinions from everybody in the room, even the quiet ones who've got a lot of good stuff to say. Think about whether when you come up with a solution, whether you're satisfying. So good enough, right? No, not good enough. Don't settle for second best solutions for your business. Think about multiple alternatives, especially for bigger decisions. Draw out everybody in the room. And then there's a way to get everybody on board. It's called qualified consensus. And it's a way for you to keep control, but get everybody's opinion in the room. And if you want to learn more about that, I can talk to you about decision-making and delegation, and we can set up your team for success.
Amazing. Nick, this has been a blast. I've learned so much more about you. Excited to continue working together. And those of you listening, if you want to follow Nick, connect with him on LinkedIn or work with him, head to the show notes and tune in again next week for another episode of That's Business.